to, do we pronounce it ARID1B? I've heard
Yeah.
ARID1B. Okay. So that's the reason we're here today to talk about
Yes.
ARID1B and your son's connection to this. And I want to get into what that's all about. Um,
Hmm.
and so maybe we can start with defining what it is, and then we can go from there and just kind of let,
Yeah.
and yeah, go ahead.
So my son has what is called a de novo mutation,
Okay.
meaning that it is not inherited from me or my husband. It's an act of the universe, and that has impacted his ARID1B gene. So as a result, he has something known as ARID1B related disorder. And ARID1B related disorder is also commonly associated with a syndrome that's kind of an umbrella for a number of different mutations called Coffin-Siris syndrome.
Mhm.
So with my son, we noticed, I would say from when he was about 6 or 7 months, that there were certain delays. He was suffering from torticollis. He was late to meet various milestones. And then by the time he was a year, we felt like we should have it checked out. We're very fortunate in the sense that he doesn't have any of the health complications that are traditionally associated or often associated with ARID1B related disorder.
Hmm.
But we took him to a specialist who recommended a full genetic exome, which we got, and then we were given this information,
Okay.
which, as any parent who's experienced this can attest, is the biggest gut punch you'll ever feel.
Sure.
And also just totally overwhelming. You're starting out on a journey. If you're like me, you know nothing about it, nothing about the special needs world, nothing about the spectrum of genetic mutations, nothing about treatments, therapeutics, therapies, schools, any of
Hmm.
it.
Right.
So there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of shock, and there's this massive learning curve.
Hmm.
And what we learned pretty quickly is that essentially with ARID1B, or ARID1B related disorder, there's what's known as a haploinsufficiency, which means that one copy of the gene regulates perfectly, and the other copy of the gene is not functioning properly.
Okay.
So when we talk, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, we set up a foundation to look at
Hmm.
possible genetic therapeutics down the line. And one of the things that scientists are looking at is, okay, maybe we can't fix the function of the copy of the gene that's not functioning, but could we maybe boost
Mm.
the copy of the gene that is functioning to do like double time
Wow.
almost
Interesting.
in order to like restore function of the gene?
Right.
So these are all words that I now say with a certain level of confidence,
Competency.
which I
Right.
can
Yeah.
assure you 5 years ago, didn't understand any of it.
Hmm.
And it's been a real learning curve and a real
Mm.
process. But now we are kind of over the hump, I think, of like the grief and the shock. And we feel incredibly blessed and
Yeah.
we love our little boy more than anything. And we want to do everything we can to give him all the support he needs to thrive.
Right.
But we accept how he is and we love him for who he is.
Ye- Yeah. And that's the beauty of all of this, is we get past the disabilities and we start to look at the
Hmm.
person as a human being. And I think
Exactly.
that's what it's all
Exactly.
about. I certainly can, attest to that through my experience in my career. And just watching the Paralympics the last week and a half has just
Yeah.
been blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Each,
And I had a wonderful pediatric specialist who said that to me early on. He was like, the shock is normal. And once the shock starts to wear off, you'll see that like it's not the end of the world. And I say
right.
that in the case of my child with full understanding that we are very privileged and lucky. My son is not unhealthy. My
Hmm.
son is not in pain. For parents who have children who are really suffering, I understand that that is a kind of a different ball game.
Sure.
For us, the primary kind of challenges, and I should just give you, I guess, a little bit of a picture of what some of the phenotypes or like
Yeah. I was going to ask if we could go into
associations
that.
with
Hmm.
ARID1B related disorder are. So, most commonly, they are intellectual delay. There is a very high prevalence of autism.
Hmm.
A lot of our children are nonverbal. I think roughly like 20 to 25% of our children are nonverbal. My son is nonverbal at the moment. He's 6 years old. I still
Is
hold
that
out
verbal?
hope. He is
Hmm.
nonverbal. Yeah.
Okay.
I still hold out hope that he will be able to speak at some stage, but I'm
Hmm.
also mentally and like logistically prepared for the
Prepare.
possibility that he might not.
Right.
So he suffers from like some sensory issues as well. A lot of our kids have issues with texture. Many of our children are on feeding tubes because they find it really difficult to eat. We're blessed in that we do not have to contend with
Oh,
that. My son's a good eater, although he doesn't like crunchy food. He can be quite specific about what he likes.
okay. So that's great.
Um,
Wonderful.
he had terrible sleeping problems early on, and we were very lucky to discover something called Slenito, which is slow release, low dose melatonin in
Mm,
these tiny, 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 tiny pills. Because obviously, like, you can't give kids like mine a normal pill and expect them to swallow it with a glass of
sure.
water.
Yeah.
So, and that has been a game changer. He sleeps beautifully at night now, which has given
That's
him
amazing.
a much better quality of life for all of
Well,
us.
sure, absolutely. He sleeps through the night, so you can sleep through the night, and then he has to get
Exactly.
rested for the next day.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
seen those kids when they do not have that rest.
Yeah,
It's
no, he would just wake up at two
daunting.
in the morning and be like, "Let's go."
Yeah,
And you can't reason with him in
right.
a traditional way. So,
Correct.
it was exhausting. And then after like a few hours, he'd be exhausted, and it was very taxing. And I know a lot of families still have issues with sleep, but we were
Yeah.
able with this slow release melatonin to nip that in the
That's
bud.
really, yeah, that's a really great thing to communicate to people too, if
Yeah,
they're not aware of it. That's the
yeah.
thing too, is finding ways to manage, and being able to share that among each other. And it sounds like with FAR, your foundation that you've helped
hmm
co-found, that's a way for you all to communicate as well as to contribute to research.
Yes. So there's a group that already exists called the CSS Foundation, the Syndrome Foundation, and they're primarily involved with like family support, although they do some research as well.
Hmm.
FAR, which is the Foundation for ARID1B Research, that we established, we're a group of parents. None of us are scientists. And we came together with the goal of raising money to further research into potential treatments, whether they be genetic therapeutics, which are making like huge strides by the minute, seemingly,
Hmm.
or whether they be for simpler things such as like repurposing drugs, for example.
Okay.
So a drug has success with one syndrome, and we could look at,
Hmm.
well, could that help our kids? And how might that help our
Right.
kids? And what would the overlap be? So that's how we started it. But of course, in the process, you find yourself, first of all, becoming like very close with this network of families who are deeply involved with the foundation.
Hmm.
And you're constantly like sharing ideas, talking about things that have worked for you, things that haven't. What's
Yeah.
also been really interesting to see, though, the old adage, like once you know a kid with autism, you know one kid with autism.
Hmm.
It's sort of similar with all of these genetic anomalies. So it's like once you know one kid with ARID1B related disorder, you know one
You
kid
know,
with
one kid.
ARID1B related disorder because our
Right.
children have very different challenges and also very different strengths.
Hmm.
A lot of the kids are verbal and in normal schools. Other kids have serious health problems. Some of them suffer from seizures.
Yes.
And so it's just been fascinating to really be able to connect with people who can understand what you're going through. And I have made myself kind of like open to any special needs parent because I have a more public platform than most
Hmm.
to say, feel free to reach out to me, especially for parents who are just getting their diagnosis. And even if it's a different genetic anomaly or whatever, maybe
Hmm.
if it's non-genetic, it doesn't really matter. I
Right.
can understand and I can relate and I can give you some tips, even though your kid may be experiencing totally different challenges to mine. Because I do think it's one of those things that unless you're in the special needs world, it is very difficult to have the language
Mm.
and the knowledge to support parents through those, particularly, I would say, those initial years.
Yeah, no, I agree 1,000%. I knew before I even got into the world, I worked in with the deaf population for many years. The perspective you have going in is not the same you're going to have walking out. I mean, the
Right.
knowledge you have before is minimal to none. If you haven't had any reason to be around that world, there's no reason for you to know. And so,
Yeah.
as you said at the opening, when you're a parent who receives the diagnosis, it's you're not prepared because you're not
Yeah,
thinking in that direction, right? And so to have that support is so critical for
it
each
really
other. And
is.
a lot of parents feel very alone, and because sometimes
Yeah,
their situations are so overwhelming that they don't have the time to be able
yeah,
to reach out or to find out. So that's why something like this today is so important for
yeah.
people to know, and just reinforce for people that you're not alone.
hmm No,
Yeah.
and I think that because I do a lot of work all over the world, I've ended up connecting to a lot of families in other countries as well. In the US and the UK, it's one thing, but in many places, there's still a real stigma, particularly around neurodevelopmental disorders
Hmm.
that have an impact, such as intellectual delay or autism. Um, and that is so painful to contend with. And,
Yeah.
and so I really try to offer whatever support I can while understanding that, like, coming from the context of a Western background, that my experience of having a special needs child is very different and very privileged by comparison.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to raise that issue with you about foreign connections and seeing
Mm,
because I know that in different countries it's dealt with differently, and a lot of these children are kind of put away, and
yes,
hidden from sight,
yes.
and they don't have the opportunities that and the government doesn't provide the funds, etc. And it has to be heartbreaking to see, especially when you have such a personal connection to it now.
It's really heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking to see how these parents like suffer in silence, because one of the most important things that I try to tell parents who are going through this and have just been given a diagnosis is that yes, you need to do everything you can to give your child all the support, all the therapies, whatever it may be that they need, but self-care is essential. And
Hmm.
too many parents, you forget about yourself. You stay up all night. Every vacation becomes like, what am I not doing? I need to be giving them, speech therapy morning, noon, and night. We need to be doing ABA morning, noon, and night. And you come to a moment where you realize you're running yourself into the ground
Right.
and you're not actually helping, and
Hmm.
that you're stripping the joy
Yeah.
of that connection and of that family bond and of the experience of bringing up a child. And so it's so vital to take the time for yourself, and I understand that that's a luxury that not everybody can afford, but self-care is really important. And if you need to put your kid in front of the TV for an hour while you go and take a nap, or maybe go and get a massage, whatever it may be,
Mhm.
like, that's okay. It
Yeah.
is not going to
Absolutely.
fundamentally alter the outcome of your child's trajectory because you went and took a nap one day
Yeah.
and put them
Right.
in front of the TV. Like, it's just
Yeah.
not. And I know that when you first get that diagnosis, the impulse is like everything else is on hold and
Hmm.
everything is going to be diverted to solving this problem. Guess
Yeah.
what? In 90% of cases, you can't solve this problem.
That's right.
You can soften the edges, you can have a powerful impact, but you're not really going to fundamentally change the outcome on some dramatic level just because you did 1 or 2 extra hours of therapies a day. And I
Exactly.
really think, and you know what will fundamentally dramatically change the impact is that you are happy, that
Hmm.
you are getting some rest, that you are taking time to like enjoy being with your child and meeting them where they are and on their terms, and not constantly feeling like you're pulling them to be where you are.
Absolutely. It's perfectly said. And it's certainly the message that I work on with parents all the time. It's one of the first things I ever say is, how are you? I ask them, how are you
Yeah.
doing? And what are you doing for yourself? And even if it's, we've talked about parents just escaping to the bathroom for like 10 minutes
Yes.
just to like
Yes.
sit and just kind of just let it
Yeah.
all go away for a few minutes
Yeah.
before you come back. Um,
Yeah.
because if you're not healthy, then it's not going to be benefit your child. And also the services, as you mentioned, constantly pushing these things on the kids. It's a
Yeah.
lot. And
It
you
is.
want to let these people just be human beings too and just exist and create the relationship with each other. And the fact that they feel that love from you, that's where it starts, as far as I believe. That's the
I
critical, most
totally
critical.
agree. And I think that we have to remember as well, like with my son, like things he really enjoys, he loves wondering. like just wandering around a garden or something.
Yeah.
And, before I would keep constantly trying to like redirect him and like engage him in play and like da 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 da. And
Yeah.
then I was like, if he loves to wander around while my other sons and I are playing on the trampoline or something, and he'll dip in and out, and like, let him wander, like, let him, and yes, encourage him to join, but then also just let him be him.
That's
Let
right.
him have that experience because, I
Yeah.
think sometimes we forget, and again, every kid's different, but like, I know my son is living an authentic life in a way
Hmm.
that no one else in my family can claim to be. Like, he is 100% who he is
Him, right?
all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's something of that that's beautiful. And so like obviously you want to push, obviously you want them to thrive, obviously you need to challenge them, and you
Yeah.
need to have boundaries crucially as well.
Of course.
But also like let it go, relax. He wants to wonder, let him wonder.
Yeah. There needs to be balance, and you need to let that person tell you who they are.
Yeah. That for
Uh,
me, honestly, like the nature, my personal nature, I'm not a patient person. I'm an impatient person. I'm a very kind of results focused, like, let's go do this, whether it's getting to some place in the world that nobody can get to or
Yeah.
whatever it is. It has been the most profound and often challenging, but also really, really valuable lesson for me to sit in the moment and be where he's at and accept that the pace is
Yeah.
not going to be the pace that I dictate. And the
Yeah.
minute I let go of a lot of
Mm.
that was the minute it went from being a kind of to
Yeah.
like a joy.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's awesome.
So,
It is an amazing lesson to learn and very difficult for a lot of people to just be able to find that patience because,
mm,
we all have our limit. We all have our
yeah,
limits. And so it's really hard. That's a wonderful lesson for people to know that because you go into extreme places in this world where I would imagine the stress level is so high and you have to push yourself to be in positions in order to be able to
yeah,
get the story that you want. I mean, when you come home and you have a child, it's like, oh no, no, let's just do this, do this, this. We want to get here.
yeah,
This is the goal. We
yeah,
want to get there.
yeah.
But it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't
It
work.
doesn't work that way.
It
Yeah, it
doesn't
doesn't
work.
work.
You just got to like throw the rule book out the window. And I
Yeah.
think, the other thing is we've been really lucky to find this school in London that offers, ABA, which in London is not as popular or as common for a number
Okay.
of reasons that I won't get into,
Hmm.
but mostly it has to do with like how expensive the therapy is. Um, and that is a godsend because it's a
Hmm.
great school. He absolutely loves it. He's there from 9 to 4 every day. And they only have like 4 or 5 weeks of vacation a year, which again, any special needs parent knows that, summer vacations,
Hmm.
spring breaks, even like vacations are hard. Holidays are
Challenging.
hard,
Hmm.
especially when you have other kids and you don't know how to like fill the day for your child with special needs. And
Right.
so I am really, really lucky to have found a place that is such a good fit for us and that really
Yeah.
gives me the support that when I'm with him on the weekends and in the evenings and the mornings, like I can just enjoy it and not be
Hmm.
constantly feeling like I need to be doing more.
Yeah. 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 No, it's so important. It's so important. I wanted to ask you about the difference because in the UK, I know the prevalence of autism is higher per 100,000 than in the United States. Obviously, we're
Mm,
bigger, so we have more of a population. But I, when I'm doing research, I'm constantly finding sources from the UK, even more than in this country, in
yeah.
America. And so, do you see a difference there? Have you had the opportunity to compare? Because you're not living in America, so I don't know. You haven't been necessarily a part of that system.
Yeah.
But is there more of an awareness in the UK about it? Or, I mean,
No, I would
is,
say honestly, and I'm half American and half British, and I've lived my
mhm,
life like literally equal time in both countries. But I would say that the US is more advanced in terms
okay.
of special needs, definitely. In terms of the therapies, the amount of money that's dedicated to the field. The UK is, I think, particularly with autism actually a little bit behind.
Oh, interesting.
And part of that is because we have something called the NHS, the National Health Service,
Hmm.
which is really it's not that it's underfunded, it's just enormous. And it's, you know, it, healthcare is free in the UK, which is a
Right.
wonderful thing.
Hmm.
But there's a downside to that,
Yeah.
which is that they're constantly strapped for cash. They're constantly lacking
Okay.
resources. There's huge waiting times. So when I took my son at the age of 1, I took him to a doctor through the like NHS system, and I took him private. And I can honestly say that if I had stayed through the NHS, I would not have had a diagnosis before he was probably maybe 3 or 4.
Oh, wow.
And I got one at 18 months.
Holy cow.
And then it would have been another 2 years to get an autism diagnosis. So I will say, in terms of stigma, the UK is
Right.
great. Like, people are way more evolved here than they were certainly when I was growing up, way more inclusive, lots of special needs kids in mainstream schools,
That's
incredible
wonderful.
resources for kids here with additional needs in terms of like, play centers and gyms and swimming pools and movie theaters and all that stuff. Like if you need, like my son has this little badge that he wears when we go to the airport and it lets him cut lines and stuff, which is kind of essential. Like it's really hard for my son to like stand in a line for half an hour. That's just
Sure.
is probably going to result in a meltdown. And so I find as a society, the UK like is wonderful. But in terms of like being on the cutting edge of the therapies and the research, no,
No.
America is
Okay.
definitely, and I know a lot of people who have significant means here in the UK, and when they get a diagnosis, they go to the US to
Oh,
at least
okay.
spend some time thinking about what the best options are for their kids, and then maybe they try to come back and like replicate it.
Hmm.
But that baseline knowledge, particularly with autism, I would say, is the US is definitely ahead.
Okay. That's really, really fascinating. Thank you so much for letting me know that. I've always been curious because
Yeah,
perhaps the UK might be a little bit more because of their awareness. Maybe they produce a little bit more for materials and things like that and options
yeah,
for the kids. Um, so maybe that's where I was, kind of led in that direction
yeah,
to think that way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, was Ezra diagnosed as autistic separately, or is that part of the
Separately.
umbrella? It was separately.
Separately. I knew it was like a common association, and
Right.
then I think he was about 2 or 2 when I was like, okay, I think this might be. And to be honest, the diagnosis, I sort of already knew that he was on the spectrum, but it was important to get the diagnosis because, as any parent knows, that diagnosis opens the way for lots of therapies and lots of
Right.
support through
Hmm.
either your insurance or whatever it may be.
Right.
So, that's the reason we wanted to like pursue that diagnosis. I think that like when we talk about autism in general now, it's so clear to me that like really we don't know. Autism is just this vast term that
Sure.
encompasses so many different things and so many different syndromes, and some of them are genetic and some of them are not, and some kids are Temple Grandin, and others are
Yes.
completely unable to function. So
Yeah.
it's kind
Oh,
of this
it's
huge umbrella term that we
spectrum is the
use to
word.
describe like a
Right.
whole world that I think we're only just starting to understand. And this is the other thing that was so striking to me. You assume that scientists and doctors know everything about the brain and, the way all these things work. And then you have a kid with a rare neurodevelopmental disorder, and you're like, oh, wow,
Yeah.
no one
And that
has any idea what's going on here. Like,
and that has
actually,
to
there
freak you out as
is.
a parent, right?
Oh, it totally does because they're not really able to offer you much in terms of a prognosis and
Right.
and I know so many friends of mine have been told your child will never walk, your child will never talk, your child will never do
Yeah.
this, and then they've gone on to do that and more.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I feel like, yeah, uh, scientists are kind of more on the cutting edge here,
Hmm.
and medicine is still kind of struggling to
A little
like
behind.
get their head around it all.
Yeah. I think what we have to be careful about always is boxing children in so young
Yes.
and predicting their futures
A
because
hundred percent.
I've seen too many kids become way more than
Yeah,
they were expected to be. Kids that couldn't walk, kids that were in braces and crutches, running 10 years
yeah,
later, 8 years later,
yeah,
running, playing golf, playing games, things like that. Kids who just kind of seemed like the light was not on, and
yeah,
you wondered if anything was getting in. And meanwhile, as you kind of referred to earlier, you think Ezra understands more than he's able to give. It's like it's getting all in there, and it's in
yeah.
there, it's in there, and then at some point, when they find the way to communicate, it comes out. And
Well,
so,
I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's called The Reason Why I Jump.
no,
And I really recommend any
okay,
parent of a nonverbal child read it. It is written by, he's now older, but at the time he was a 10-year-old Japanese boy, completely nonverbal. And he wrote this book, and he is a profoundly sensitive, thoughtful, very much sentient soul. But on the surface, all his mother was seeing was kind of like chaotic behavior and silence, and then he writes this book and you're like, "Oh my goodness.
yeah,
We have no idea." And so that for me was, it's a little bit devastating on the one hand because you're like, "Whoa, what am I missing?" But
yeah,
on the other hand, it's so comforting because it's like there are so many mysteries and so many things that you cannot necessarily pick up on through the traditional mechanisms of communication. And like,
right,
but don't lose hope and don't be dismissive and don't look down
yes.
on your child or think that they're not capable of experiencing profound emotions or whatever it may be.
Oh, 1,000%. And it's almost the way I look at it, it's almost like the adventure of it. If you can look at it as
Yeah,
the adventure, what's next? What could we discover next about what
yeah,
you can do, And as these doors open and more things come out, it's a wonderful experience if we can look at it from that perspective and not, as you said earlier, taking it and looking at it as like, oh my gosh, this horrible thing has happened to us. But
yeah,
look at this beautiful person before me,
yeah,
and they have as much value as I do because just because they can't communicate the way I can communicate, we make these judgments and we're so
yeah,
societally trained, that I think that things are starting to change a little bit.
yeah,
And I'm hopeful. I mean, I'm so excited the way Paris kind of transformed parts of the city to be more accessible.
yes.
And I'm talking to more people about accessibility and inclusion. And so it feels like it's coming to the surface more and more. So I'm very
No,
excited to
definitely.
see that. Yeah. Um,
Definitely.
what was the question I was going to ask you? For you, finding balance, I mean, for you and your husband, I know it can be a lot as parents, and we mentioned it. How do you find your balance between your work life and your home life? And do you feel, as you said, parents need to find time for themselves? What do you do for yourself to be able to give yourself, back yourself, back Clarissa?
Yeah. So it's interesting, for me, my work is like, that's my way of filling the tank. It gives me joy, it gives me inspiration, it gives me energy, and it makes me a better mother. Other
Hmm.
parents I know, and I think it's wonderful, this is just a question of what's right for you, have actually quit their jobs after finding out that their child is suffering from whatever kind of an issue they may be experiencing, and have dedicated themselves full time to
Yes.
either giving them ABA at home or whatever it might be. But for me, my work is my vocation, and like that's a hugely important part of my life. And so that's definitely part of it. And then another part of it, I would say, is, you know, finding a time to like get a babysitter or a nanny to like look after the kids or do bath time, which can
Mm,
sometimes be like a really stressful time in the day.
sure.
And like just be really mindful about insisting upon times where my husband and I, as a couple, either go for a walk and get an ice cream. It can be really very simple, or
Hmm.
go to a bar and get a martini, depending on what kind of mood we're in, and
Right.
just like have that time. And you're kind of like, oh, we should really be. And then it's like, no, we're
Hmm.
not. We're doing
Yeah.
this. We're being grown-ups together. Our
Yeah.
children are fine. Our
That's right.
eldest son is fine. And it's really important to, because I think that, often couples with special needs children, everything becomes so focused on that situation that the kind of natural, and this happens to couples with children in general, but I think it's heightened with special needs children. You lose that, like, that intimacy or that kind of spirit of like just being together as two people and choosing each other's company, as opposed to like we're in this like intense situation and every minute has to be spent stressfully brainstorming how to like fix this.
Right.
um so I think, yeah, I always tell couples to like, whatever it is that you enjoy, is it big nature, is it that like go out for a walk, like
Hmm.
do that thing on your own, be selfish
Yeah.
together if possible
Yeah,
occasionally.
yeah, no, being selfish is important in those moments, absolutely.
So
So I think it's critical. Um, you mentioned ice cream a few times. What's your favorite ice cream? Because it seems that you
Mint choc chip.
mint chocolate chip. Okay,
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Is on a
Yeah.
sugar cone, regular cone, in a dish,
Regular cone.
regular cone.
Regular
Okay,
cone.
no waffles, no
Regular.
waffle cone. Okay,
Oh, I do a waffle cone. I'll do a waffle
yeah, you
cone.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I like a waffle cone.
I permit myself one time a year to do a waffle.
Yeah.